All right, I think we can start now.
Yeah, it is already 6. We start, but don't forget to.
Yes, I record. Can you hear me all? Okay, and do you see the PowerPoint? Okay. I will start because it's 6 o'clock. Some people are on will watch this event on streaming on LinkedIn, and but I'm sure there a lot of other people will join this event. But maybe they're late because they're academics. I don't know. Anyway, I would like to welcome you all to the first online event of the Frankfurt at the main show of the global pop-up exhibition Hostile Terrain 94. This question and answer session will focus on archaeological perspective on forced migrations in borderlands. And before we start, I would like to briefly introduce ourselves and the project. Our team consists of Malia Bayatork, Pinar Chanarus, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, and myself, Friedemani Neumann. I will also moderate the session. We are all migration anthropologists affiliated with Göttingen University. The event will take about 90 minutes with a 40-minute panel debate. And after that, I would like to engage you all in a vivid discussion. And if you would like to say something when we discuss as a part of the audience, please type an asterisk in the chat, that little store on the keyboard, and we would like to record this panel session discussion just for your information. We decided to show the pop-up exhibition in Frankfurt at the former Gestapo and deportation prison, Klapperfeld, and we decided to collaborate with the initiative Faites Votre Jeu that runs the Cultural and Activist Center today, to which we owe really a great debt of gratitude. Klapperfeld is a unique place to interlink the external and internal historical borders and the respective crises and struggles related. While we start the online program today, we hope to open the show on site in April, but this depends, of course, of the pandemic developments, and we'll see how it goes. I will not explain about Hostile Terrain event. This is the task of the curators who are with us today, but I would like to briefly talk about the Frankfurt show. In this show, we include borderland perspectives by activists, artists, and scholars from Turkey, Afghanistan, Iran, Europe, in addition to the US-Mexican perspective by the Hostile Terrain display. And the contributors will be our guests in the upcoming events next week and the week after. We would like to sincerely thank the Undocumented Migration Project team for their support and all the contributors, toe tackers, craft women and men who helped to realize the project. Moreover, we thank Medico International and Lush Certipat for their financial, and Barış için Akademisyenler Almanya, the German section of the Academics for Peace, for their administrative support. Also, we would like to express our thanks to the Material Forced Migration Project and the Center for Global Migration Research, both Uni Göttingen, for their endorsement. And the event today is entitled From Deserts to Shores, Engaged Archaeologies of Forced Migrations, an American-European dialogue on hostile terrains. We will hold this dialogue today with two teams of quite distinguished researchers and curators in the field of border and forced migration studies. First, the Transient Matter team based at Brown University / Hafenwerfer Museum of Anthropology, Rhode Island, US, conducting archaeological research on the Mediterranean border crossings. And second, the Hostile Terrain team / Undocumented Migration Project based at the University of California conducting forensic anthropologist and archaeological research on border crossings and fatalities in the Sonora Desert. Our aim is to elaborate on the commonalities and differences between the two contexts and projects of research in our joint discussion. And in the name of our whole team, thank you very, very much for joining our event today on an early morning Los Angeles time and on an evening Greece time, and everyone who's in between that. Thank you very much for joining. Now I would like to ask the transient matter team and then the hostile terrain team members to briefly introduce themselves and their personal role in the respective team. Yannis, would you like to start?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ferdinand. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. We are very glad as a team to be amongst you, and we are especially glad to be able to share a panel with my friend and colleague Jason de León and his team. I'm an admirer, long-term admirer of his work, and I haven't the chance to see the exhibition yet in any location, but I'm sure it's going to be great when it's materialized in your location in Frankfurt and Göttingen. So I want to say a couple of things about our own specific project, and then hopefully in the discussion there'll be issues to do with the comparative dimension that you want to explore. So as archaeologists, as you know, we deal with materiality and with temporality. And I think it is obvious that the phenomenon of border crossing and migration is both a material phenomenon, and also it deals with different notions and versions and aspects of temporality. I myself conduct research on the early past, so I do excavate an Neolithic site, but at the same time, I do explore also contemporary materiality. And I got into the issue of migration because for a long time, I've been investigating matters to do with national identity and nationalism in the Mediterranean, especially in Greece. And the connection between materiality and nationhood is something that I'm very, very keen to explore. So when the so-called migration crisis emerged in the Mediterranean, it was clear that as archaeologists, we could actually contribute to that phenomenon by paying specific attention to the material and the temporal dimensions of border crossing. And also we could elaborate and explore further ideas about identity, nationhood, borders, but also racialization through the sustained study and attention to the specific material facets of the phenomenon. At the same time, as a politicized person and as an activist, it was important for me to engage with this in a thoughtful manner that would make the most of my skills as an archaeologist. So for me, the reasons were both epistemic and political. Now, the team from Brown can say more about how they see their own connection, but I just want to say one or two things about the emphasis on the material. Because sometimes people do get surprised when I hear that archaeologists are actually dealing with migration. They are used to be hearing anthropologists, sociologists, political scientists, other people, but not archaeologists. Well, we are aware of many narratives that are produced by many different groups of scholars, but we very often also know that things, objects, artifacts tell stories themselves. They are biographical objects. They have things to say, they have things to evoke also that cannot be said through other kinds of narratives, let's say oral histories. We also know that many migrants, many border crossers or other, are constantly under pressure to narrate the self, to produce oral testimonies in front of asylum officers, in front of authorities, in front of journalists, and in front of social and sociocultural anthropologists. And my experience tells me that very often they are actually fed up of narrating that story, of narrating the self, because in most of the time do not actually see any major impact in terms of their own case or in terms of migration in general. They don't see how that helps them in many of the cases. So very often, instead of focusing on that oral dimension, that dimension of narration, objects, things, artifacts become the mediators, become the social agents that actually produce narratives and stories, but also create relationships, create a space, create a shared space of interaction between the researcher activist and the border crossers, or people on the move in different contexts. A final point in relation to materiality. In addition to things that are brought by border crossers or discarded by them in the process of border crossing, it is important for the archaeology of contemporary migration to also interrogate the materiality of detention and the materiality of border crossing. So one of the things we are doing as part of this project is not only to record that material dimension of border crossers' lives, but also see how the border regime, how the deportation regime, how the various authorities produce specific materialities themselves. These are, the centers for reception and identification, the detention centers, but also the various facilities, camps that other agents, for example, the humanitarian sector, the various NGO have produced. So you have different materialities. So for example, in a context like Moria, which is one of my main foci for a number of years, you could see many different facets of materiality, from the materiality of the razor wire that is being put there with European money, European Union money, to the materiality of the big NGOs that have landscaped the site and produced a regimented kind of landscape for migrants, to the organic materiality of migrants themselves, to their own landscaping of the site, their own constitution of their own material being, through their own shelters, through their own facilities for making food and all that. So it is a complex phenomenon. It's an assemblage of migration, not just things, artifacts discarded by migrants themselves. And I'll stop here as a kind of short introduction.
So thank you very much. Yeah, that was already a broad answer and a deep path into our topic of today. So Ayşe would like to say something about your personal engagement in the Transit Metro team.
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ayşe. I'm a PhD student in anthropology. I'm actually a sociocultural anthropologist, but I'm interested in materiality and material culture. So I got involved with the project actually by taking one of Yannis's classes. So only after I got to know Yannis, I was involved in the project. So I actually helped with the curation project mostly. So I was not in Moria doing the fieldwork research. I think that's enough for now. Darcy?
Yeah, I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name is Darcy Hackley, and I participated both in the 2017 field season on Lesbos when I was a graduate student at Brown, and also am one of the co-curators of the exhibition, as Ayşe is as well.
Thank you very much. And now, Hostile Terrain team, brief introduction. Who would like to start? Jason?
Sure, I'll go. It's lovely to see everybody. I hope people are doing well and staying safe and sane. It's great to see Yannis. I have not seen Yannis in a couple of years, so I'm glad we can at least convene virtually. My name is Jason De León. I am professor of anthropology and Chicano and Central American Studies at University of California, Los Angeles, and I am also the head curator of Hostile Terrain 94, and I'm the director of the Undocumented Migration Project, which is a long-term research, arts, and education collective that aims to document and raise awareness about the experiences of clandestine migrants leaving Latin America and attempting to enter the United States. The work that we do is a mix of ethnography, archaeology of the contemporary, forensic science, photoethnography, and a whole host of other approaches. Basically, it's an interdisciplinary exploration of the migration experience that's constantly evolving. And one of our major commitments is finding ways to translate social science data for different types of audiences, whether that's through writing, photography, documentary film, or in this case, exhibition work. And Hostile Terrain 94 is an exhibition that developed out of a desire to remind the public that the things that have been happening to migrants along the U.S.-Mexico border have a deep history that precede the Trump administration. It's a very brutal history that has cost the lives of thousands of people, but also it's just part of this much larger global migration crisis that we are currently experiencing. And so the idea of the project is to both connect people to the lives that have been lost in Arizona, but also to do it in a way that helps them to think about what's happening in their own backyard. And so, you know, our hosting partners around the globe have been just so amazing and crucial for connecting this project with their own communities and finding ways to bring in other researchers and other artists and activists who are interested in these issues, so that we can sort of create a general sense of both awareness, I think, and I would hope solidarity. So we are deeply appreciative of the work that you all have been doing there. We're sad that we cannot be there in person right now, but we do have high hopes that eventually the Hostile Terrain 94 team will travel to Germany and maybe just sleep on your couches, if nothing else, just to say hi. I feel like we've spent so much time with one another on the internet, and you know, we are hoping that at some point that we can get together in person. But I will pass the baton to the rest of the team here so that I can mute, because I think the wind is pretty intense here right now. I might move inside in a minute.
Hello, I'm Austin Shipman. I am the program manager for the Undocumented Migration Project, as well as Hostile Terrain 94. You all have probably emailed with me at some point about finances and other not so fun behind the scene things. But I am very excited to be here and have Hostile Terrain 94 in Germany and throughout all of Europe. And I've been involved with the UMP since 2010. It's a project that means a lot to me. And with that, I will pass it on to Nicole.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Smith, and I'm an exhibition coordinator for Hostile Terrain 94. I got involved with the Undocumented Migration Project while I was an undergrad at the University of Michigan. And while there, I think my last year is when we first started the exhibition. And so it was our first sort of go around at it. It was myself and a few other students at the university that were involved in filling out the tags and hanging them up, and that whole process for the first time. And so at that time, it wasn't, you know, a project that was going to be this global thing. So it's been really great to see how it's evolved over the past few years. And with that, I'll pass it on to Gabe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriel Canter. I am the other Nicole. I went to the University of Michigan and as an undergrad studied sociocultural anthropology. We both started working for Jason at different times after taking his course. And I was also one of those first 6 undergraduate students who started working on HT94 from the beginning. And so I'm sure we will have a lot to talk about in terms of the evolution of it and how incredible it's been working with so many hosting partners around the world. But I'm just very happy to be here. So it's nice to see you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to dig a bit deeper into the actual displays, and because you framed what you're doing already in a broader scope, but in order to make people understand who are not familiar with your projects, can you, some of the transient matter project, just briefly explain what is the transient matter display, the exhibition about, and then the same for the hostile terrain team and the hostile terrain display. What have you showed? What have you done in order with your in setting up your display? What do you show there?
I will start by saying a couple of things, and then Ayşe and Darcy will continue as the curators. As part of our work on Lesbos, we also collected a small quantity of artifacts. Now, we thought long and hard about collection. It's not something that came naturally. I mean, as an archaeologist, we do collect things all the time. And so there was a natural impulse to collect a lot. But we were aware that that principle and that idea would not and should not apply in a problematic manner in our fieldwork, not only because of the scale of the assemblage of migration on Lesbos, the assemblage of things, but also because of the various ethical and other issues that are involved in the process of taking things away, collecting things and moving them all the way to the US. So what we did was to actually be very, very selective on what we took with us. As part of the project, we carried out a small-scale survey and excavation of one specific locality called the Live Vest Cemetery. You may have heard of it. It is world renowned now. It is basically a dump. It is a huge concentration, a secondary deposit in archaeological terms, of things that were discarded at beaches. So things that migrants left, but also lots of live vests and other things that were discarded as they were disembarking from the boats, as they were arriving on Lesbos. These things were collected from municipal authorities and they were deposited in that specific location. So a monument was produced, a heritage monument in some way, a dark heritage monument, and we decided that we need to spend time there. We need to do some work that is both conventionally archaeological, but also unconventional in terms of how do you excavate a huge pile of live vests. So we actually spent time there doing that recording, but also we collected some stuff that we took with us. And the purpose was to actually use that material as a material presence of a specific phenomenon that other people need to become aware of. Now, through the work of Jason and through the work of other colleagues, people in the US are now aware of what's happening on the US-Mexico border. They know both the kind of the tragic dimensions of it, but also the systematic and interesting work that's been done. People in the US are less familiar with what's happening in the Mediterranean. They may know the broader kind of theme, but not the specifics. So the things we brought with us were material witnesses of the phenomenon of border crossing from another context, from the largest, in fact, border between the global south and the global north, but also the deadliest border. Now, around 1,400 people died in 2020 alone in the process of crossing from the global south to the global north through the Mediterranean. And that was a low year in many ways. And that's an underestimate as well. So we are dealing with a context that is extremely interesting in many different ways and extremely lethal as well in resulting in border crossers' death. So it was important for us through that material collection to actually evoke some of the realities of the experience and also some of the realities of, let's say, detained in camps or living in situations like the ones in Moria. So we wanted to do that, but also we wanted to emphasize other facets, not only the tragic, the difficult realities of crossing the border, but also the agency of migrants themselves. We wanted to foreground the things that migrants themselves produce through their own initiative, how they construct their own shelter, how they provide for their own food, because they cannot rely on a bankrupt system of provision that the state has actually installed. Also, we wanted to show works of art, works of upcycling, things that objects they actually produce through the recycling of live vests and other objects that are found on beaches. So we structured the exhibition under three different themes. One was the border crossing. The second was Moria. We felt we had to focus on that specific locality, the largest refugee camp in Europe, in fact. And the third was works of art and other projects to do with transformation, to do with making, to do with crafts and activities that migrants actually employ in that process of being there and wait for their own case to be examined at Lesbos. At the end of the day, we wanted to produce a space. We wanted to transform the museum into a space of debate and dialogue. We are aware of the dangers of aestheticization. We didn't want to show in glass cases things as if they were archaeological objects or works of art. We wanted to have them in such a way as to become fully evocative in their own specific texture and materiality, but also we wanted to create that space for others to be there and debate what's happening, and perhaps also compare what's happening in the US with what's happening in the Mediterranean. So these are some of the thoughts that guided our exhibition. So Darcy, Ayşe, do you want to add?
Darcy?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think I can just like briefly mention what is in the exhibits. So we ended up having like three themes. So one is border crossings, the second is the Moria camp, and then the third is art making as world making. So we tried to use the space in a way that it would also thematically would make sense. And for border crossings, we exhibit some of the life jackets that were collected in Lesbos, as well as some floating inner tubes. For the Moria camp, we mostly have videos and photos, not so many objects. And for art making as world making, we have upcycled bags made by immigrants, as well as painted t-shirts and some paintings, other artworks that are all made by the immigrants themselves in Moria, in Lesbos in general.
Sorry, can I just add one other detail that I think is important, if you allow me, and that's to do with photography. We know, and Jason already mentioned photography and photoethnography as important, parts and components of our projects. In addition to the photos that we took, that I took while I was working, let's say on Moria, it was important for me and for us to actually show photo representations of life in the camp done by migrants themselves. So the summer before, I had given a group of people who were trained to be photographers and filmmakers, group of people who lived inside the camp. I gave them a cheap Polaroid and asked them to pass it around in the camp for a number of months and produce their own photo depictions of what Moria is to them. So a selection of the photos that we received, the small Polaroid photos of the life inside the camp, is also shown and exhibited. You can actually see it also on the link you have here on chat. It was very important to do that. It was very important to see also how different their own sense of photographing that reality was from my own. The emphasis for them was on the claustrophobic conditions of the camp, on, they turned the camera down as opposed to high up, and they wanted to show us small details that were extremely evocative of what it means to live inside these crowded and highly difficult conditions.
Anything you would like to add, Darcy? Or
yeah, I mean, I think in general we were really just interested in getting away from the tropes of life jackets and things like that, and displaying a variety of objects from a variety of different contexts that were all in one way or another very relatable and very communicative, whether the voice is directly from inhabitants of Moria to the audience, or things that we were sort of filtering through an archaeological lens from the dump. All of these objects were selected very carefully to sort of tell stories at an individual scale, at a one person to one person scale. So not really emphasizing the sort of the mass that a lot of other projects on migration have focused on, but taking a sort of different and more focused individual tack.
Thank you very much. So it's a kind of presencing like the border crossings, the transformation of Moria by migration, and then the agency of people on the island in detention by artist engagement, by taking pictures and these kind of things. What I really like about the two projects, or comparing hostile terrain to the transient matter project, is that Jason, I know that you and your team, you did these kind of exhibitions, like showing objects off the field from the border areas in museums. You did that for a couple of years, like in the State of Exception exhibition that was shown in 2013 in the Humanities Gallery in Michigan, Michigan Uni. What was the idea? What was the motive behind moving away from displaying things to building up a kind of global pop-up exhibition and engage people into writing toe tags? What was that? What are the reasons behind that turn or shift?
Well, the State of Exception exhibition began as a collaboration between myself, a curator at the University of Michigan named Amanda Krugliak, and a photographer named Richard Barnes. And initially, they had been very interested in displaying the objects from the collection of, about 6,000 artifacts that we have from the Arizona desert. And I had been really apprehensive about using those objects in exhibition work, partly because I really did not, I have a deep distrust of the ethnographic museum or the ethnographic exhibition. And when Amanda came to me and said we want to put some of the stuff on display, I said, I really want nothing to do with, I don't want to do any kind of ethnographic exhibition. And then she said to me, well, actually it'd be in an art gallery. And I said, well, that's even worse. I'm even more worried now about, a lack of context or, overly aestheticizing these things. But what I came to realize was that the art space really allowed for a lot more experimentation and a lot more ambiguity, and which is really how I think about many aspects of this process, is that, it cannot be tied up with a bow, and there's no kind of straightforward narrative. There's so many different things to consider and different perspectives and an incredible amount of ambiguity. So I got very interested in the experimental role of that the art space kind of allowed. We ended up, so State of Exception ran from 2013 until 2017. I think we did 5 shows, and the last show was in New York at the Parsons Gallery at the New School. And I think the show ended on a kind of nice note. I felt like the final version of it I was very happy with. It was a nice mix of artifacts, migrant stories via audio, photographs migrants had taken, photographs that we had taken, but it also, I think it had kind of run its course. And one aspect of that exhibition was this giant wall of about 1,000 backpacks, And after that show closed, we started getting lots of requests for people wanted to keep building this wall of backpacks. And I just felt like by that point, you know, Ai Weiwei had already done all of the life jacket kinds of things, and we were really, you know, people were ramping up the scale of the display of these things. And I just felt like we needed to think about new ways now to engage with this stuff, and I became much more interested in the, you know, the little details, the nuance, but also, you know, I thought that the objects themselves in some, I was getting worried when we were having these shows and people were saying things like, you know, these artifacts are so sad, these really impact me kind of things. And for me, it was like, well, it's not the objects that are sad, right? It's they're standing in for these other things, but I feel like sometimes it's easier to empathize with a backpack or see ourselves in a backpack than it is to actually see who the people who are responsible for leaving those materials and their kinds of experiences. So I wanted to find new ways to connect with an audience, and we still have been using the objects. I mean, we Hostile Terrain 94 grew out of a multimedia exhibition that we did in Portland, Maine, at the Mecca, the Maine Institute of Contemporary Art, and then we did a follow-up show at the Phillips Art Museum in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and that was a multimedia show. It was a mix of audio, video, objects, as well as the toe tag wall. But it was during the course of the toe tag construction. Basically, two things had happened. The first version of Hostile Terrain, the multimedia exhibition, involved the reproduction of a map of migrant death in Arizona that was all a series of red dots. And I felt like the red dots, people were looking at all these deaths on the wall, but they weren't perhaps understanding what those things actually represented. So for the follow-up exhibition, we decided to replace the red dots with custom toe tags. And all of the students who were working in the lab, including Gabe and Nicole at the time, we decided we'd fill out these toe tags, and then we would mount them on the wall in place of these red dots in the exact location. And as the students started filling out these toe tags, one of the things that really came up early on was that it was very difficult emotionally to handwrite out the names of the dead. And so we started thinking, well, maybe instead of having people come to an exhibition and look at this wall, we asked them to partner with us to experience, you know, what it means to write out the names of the dead as a form of witnessing. And so we started immediately thinking about that as a project, and then I thought to myself, why can't we just make this a cheaper exhibition? You know, Hostile Terrain costs upwards of like $20,000 to, or State of Exception costs upwards of $20,000 to put up. But we decided, okay, with Hostile Terrain, we can make it, you know, relatively inexpensive to do, and then we can just allow anybody to host it. And, you know, then the onus is on them to organize their communities, to get people together to write out the names of the dead, and then also to find ways to connect it with the things that are happening in their own communities around issues of immigration. And then it just sort of, you know, grew from there.
Okay. So, but it's like two different displays, the more object-based displays of the transient matter, and then the toe tags displays. But what I feel is very important for both exhibitions is the engagement of people in the field, but also people in the museum. Then what you have done, Yannis, in a section which is called "These passports don't pass many ports." I really like that phrase, but and this map where people relate their own migration histories to the exhibition. I really like that. I know that both projects conducted research in really difficult terrains, and my question is, how did you as a team develop strategies to cope with difficult situations, like personally on the one hand, but also as a team? That would be of my interest.
Okay, who wants? Shall I start? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Well, the short answer is that there is no strategy, that you have to deal with the situation as it comes, and you have to judge the situation according to the specific, conditions you find yourself in. So for me, the important thing, of course, to remember always is that you're not there to extract data. You're not there to develop a research project. You're not there to stage an exhibition. The exhibition was an afterthought that developed out of the teaching. You are there because you care about the whole issue. You are there because you care about the people you're actually talking with. So that kind of project, that idea of a project is constantly under suspension. A project that can actually be abandoned at any moment was something that was guiding, and I'm sure all of us, our research, our presence, I would say, our activism as well as our research. So, anthropologists often say that our primary responsibility is not to knowledge in the abstract, is not to anthropology, is not to even to our colleagues. Our primary responsibility is and should be to the people we're working with, to our collaborators or interlocutors or people we are actually engaging with in the field. And I think that's even more so for people under very, very difficult and stressful conditions, right? So it's not something that we do lightly. It's something that causes enormous, upheaval and stress to us even, but not, of course, doesn't compare to the stress that people go through every day when they live in those situations. It was very often the case that we had to abandon any sense of recording or collecting data because other priorities came up, other things came up that were more important. Helping to resolve a situation or contributing to a project that some collaborators in the field were involved in, like, creating an impromptu school or kind of creating something that was important for them as a facility, as a structure for them to maintain their lives. There was also intimidation by the camp authorities, very often by the police and others. For example, the case of Moria. Moria was a militarized place. It grew out of a conscript camp. And in fact, the state kept one section of Moria as a overtly military zone. So there was army stationed there. There was a small garrison as part of that refugee camp. Now, I've been thinking a lot about why this is the case. And I think I came to the conclusion that it is deliberately so, because they wanted at any time to tell us, look, you're in a military installation now. No photos, nothing, because the special rules that apply to the military installation apply to the place here. So you could see how there were many excuses and many kind of possibilities for the authorities to actually intimidate researchers and others. And in fact, they did, and they do. So in the list that you sent us, there was a question saying, did you comply by the regulations of the authorities, or did you ignore them? And I would say that both. There were cases where you had and we were complying, and there were others where we had to ignore that and we had to actually do something that was important at that specific moment. Yeah. So these are some of the first kind of thoughts about it, but it is something that you can discuss for hours.
Okay, but concerning sometimes you're confronted with, I don't know, I can imagine that you're confronted with quite shocking or distressing situations. How did you deal with these kind of things in your team?
Darcy, do you want to? I've been talking a lot. Do you want to say?
Sure. I think it's unresolved, right? For me, it is completely unresolved. And you, like Yannis was saying, you deal with everything sort of as it comes, and sometimes in retrospect, you're not sure about your reactions if you did the right thing or not. For us, at least in the 2017 season, we were bouncing back and forth between work actually within Moria in the camp, and then work in the Life Vest Cemetery. And I think that being able to bounce back and forth between these two contexts for us allowed some processing time, because dealing with the material in the dump was also difficult sometimes, but not nearly in the same way as being confronted with real-time situations that people were existing in. So it was a way to take a little time and sort of process what we'd been hearing from people without actually escaping from the reality of the situation, but just dealing with facets of it that didn't require so much reaction. So for me, I think that was really productive. But yeah, it was still, it's difficult. I don't think it can be anything other than difficult. And I think if you're going to engage in it, if you're going to engage with it, you have to be, you can't really prepare for that, but you have to be open to it. I don't really know what else to say.
Thank you. Anything more you would like to add, Ayşe?
Not really, but I think for migration research in general, I'm teaching for the introduction to cultural anthropology class, and we are reading these like kind of classical or like famous ethnographies. And there was a line in Angela Garcia's book. It was like, are you going to sit down and watch, observe, or are you going to get your hands dirty? Somebody was saying that to the ethnographer basically, and I kind of keep thinking about that. So I think we're all doing this research. We're all interested in this topic because we deeply care about it. We care about social injustices and inequality. And yeah, we kind of have to be hands-on and kind of at least try to be there for the people, even if it just means like co-witnessing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. How was it in the hostile terrain team? Because you guys are really dealing not only with living people in detention, but also with a lot of dead people in the desert. How do you cope with these kind of situations personally and as a team? What kind of strategies do you have developed?
Well, I think I'll just talk briefly about the fieldwork, and then I'll let Gabe and Nicole talk about the exhibition sort of self-care and the way in which we work with audiences to sort of deal with the stuff. You know, in terms of the field, I think the number one strategy for us is just the creation of trust amongst ourselves. Trust so that we can all be vulnerable together, so that we can all be very open about the way in which the different ways that we experience these things, but then also, you know, very open to the understanding that we are sitting in a very privileged position, and we choose to do as researchers, we choose to expose ourselves to other people's, you know, trauma, and that's something that we have to always remind ourselves. As difficult as it is for us to see some of these things, you know, it pales in comparison to what it's like to actually directly go through these things. So I think that's something that we constantly remind ourselves of, is that you know, it's tough to witness, but it's tougher to live it. And so we have to find strategies to both deal with our own you know, emotions, but then also to try to be the best researchers that we can be, the most empathetic, the most sensitive, and kind, as we are trying to, you know, document these things. And part of that is just being open about how we're feeling about these things, trying to be as open as possible to the people that collaborate with, so that they know that, you know, we are coming to bear witness, but we're also there to just be as helpful as we can humanly be in these situations. And it's not about extraction, but I think it's really about, you know, collaboration. And so being in the field and trying to give as much of ourselves to people as we can, so that they recognize that we're not there to take what we want and run off, but we're there to you know, to be supportive if we can. And you never know what the world's going to throw at you, and no matter how prepared you are for these things, you know, migrants will say that you nothing you can do will fully prepare yourself for the desert. And I think it's the same in terms of nothing you do will fully prepare you to see the things that people go through. And so it's just, you know, being open to knowing that that there always is going to be something that will come out of the blue, and all you can do is try to prepare yourself for dealing with that in a positive way. But I think for us, it's really helpful to trust one another. And I think with the field work, one of the things that I really strive to do is to create an environment where everybody is supportive of everybody else, and everybody feels that that there is a safe space to talk about, you know, how they're feeling, how they're processing this stuff. And, you know, I'm sure, I mean, and Austin can talk about, you know, she was a part of one of the earliest field seasons, so the 2010 season, which was really the first time. To 2009, I took 2 or 3 students to the field, and then in 2010, there were like 16 of us, and that was really the first time where we had to deal as a large group with, you know, being together in the field and trying to engage with this very difficult topic. But maybe, I don't know, Austin, if you want to say anything about the kind of fieldwork aspect before we pass it to Gabe and Nicole.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of being out there as a group that, you know, by the design of field school is pretty much on top of each other 24/7, dealing with some very intense subject matter. It was really essential for us to have super open communication and dialogue, and be there for each other, be willing to, you know, discuss our feelings in the context of not just like the difficulties of a field school, but with the subject matter that we were examining as well, and to create intentional space for that. And I think honestly too, part of it was finding room for moments of being silly as well, because even though you're dealing with this really, really intense, you know, these really, really intense topics and items that you're looking at that, you know, directly linked to human struggle, you have to be kind to yourself at the same time, and it can't just be all serious. You have to like strike that balance, and I think that's always been important for the UMP. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I'll take it, and then Nicole, if you have anything else to add, let me know. But I'll start by saying, Darcy, I totally agree with what you said, that it's just like a feeling of being unresolved. And I've never been out in the field myself, but just working on hostile terrain alone, you know, as Jason was saying earlier, so much of the reason we wanted this to be a large collaboration where everyone involved gets to be a part of each important piece of the process is because there's such a range of emotions that you feel while working on it. And it's so emotionally intense that we instantly discovered, the 6 of us, as we were filling out those tags 2.5 years ago. And you know, for a while it was just us, and like mostly me and Nicole, as we were like, and our team there as we were filling out the tags and really kind of coming up with the bare bones of what the project was going to be. And I think so much of the emotional complexities is the fact that you're reading and writing name after name of 3,200 people who have died in the desert of Arizona as a result of a government policy that weaponizes that environment. And the worst part of it all is that you're reading their names. They're a name on a spreadsheet because of this policy. And sometimes, you know, a third of them are unidentified. And so at every workshop that we've had with folks, we've, you know, reiterated the fact that so much of this project is to remember that everyone who is on this list is not just on a list, and that this project can't possibly represent who they were, but it's just to remember them. But it became really interesting over time, the more we got to work in depth with hosts who were finally taking on the endeavor, and they were filling out the tags, they were planning the meetings, they were you know, doing even the boring logistical parts of the process. They were dealing with all of those emotions. And there's one group, there's a team in Minnesota of all undergraduate students. And they've really, I mean, developed all kinds of new portions of this project, and it's been amazing to work with them. But, you know, before the pandemic, they were anticipating this only being a project that they were going to work on for 6 months, like to an academic school year. And it's turned into something that they give still 100% to, but for, you know, almost 3 times as long, because now they're going to do their exhibition next fall. And they were doing a lot of virtual toe tag filling workshops online and like weekly. And by the end of October, these kids were burnt out and really conflicted with how to feel about everything. And because it's the weirdest feeling too, to be like, oh yeah, I spent hours punching in data, because it's these people are not data. And so we had to take November off as a team with that group in Minnesota, and we would have some nights where we would just meet and have, you know, like Austin said, try to just kind of have like team building exercise nights to take care of themselves. But, you know, this team here at Frankfurt, Main, I'm really also curious to hear for you guys what this process was like and how it's felt to you. So I think I'll stop rambling and wrap that up, but if not now, later we can get to that. I would really love to hear that.
Yeah, sure. Anything else you, Nicole, would like to add in terms of coping with this distressing situations or complying with the authorities? Because we did not talk about that concerning the hostile terrain project.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, I don't have a ton to say, but we often talk about how Hostile Terrain 94 is really an experiment in empathy. And so I think, like Yannis and Jason had mentioned, it's not about the extraction, it's not about the exhibition itself. And, you know, like we are telling these stories and showcasing them to people who are not hearing them. And so through this project and through really emphasizing the participatory aspects of it, we're really trying to not only recognize and raise awareness about what's happening at the US-Mexico border, but showcasing how those things are impacting what's happening in one's own community, whether that's, you know, in Minnesota or in Frankfurt, and drawing those connections. So I think that for me is a way to kind of think about, you know, like these are very difficult things to kind of cope with and deal with, but really leaning on your community, and, you know, our team leans on each other a lot, and just kind of helping each other out as much as you can. So.
Yeah, just a brief comment before we move to the discussion with the audience as well. I have to add that for me personally, I also wrote many toe tags in Frankfurt, but the most important thing for me was as well to share these experiences with the people around me. This is really the core of how you can make something positive out of it. It's not just dreadful and distressing, but it's also a kind of awareness you can gain by filling in these toe tags, and you can do it together. And that is really at the heart of what I take from filling in toe tags. Yeah. I think just a brief question before we continue with to discuss with the audience. What is the most pressing, the most urgent things you need for your context of research and engagement that need to be changed, and how can you contribute to do that with your work? I know it's a difficult question. Anyway, I ask it.
Okay, shall I start?
Sure.
I think the most pressing thing which needs to happen in the context where I work, the context where we work on Lesbos, is to allow people to continue their journey. To actually, however, that requires a complete change of policy on the part of the European Union and on the part of the state authorities. It requires a shift away from the Fortress Europe mentality, but also a shift away from the idea that you need to keep people contained on an island, on a remote border island, because you don't want them to travel into, the heartland of Europe. You may have known that the European Union have started producing a new policy, a new pact, a new asylum and migration pact, which in fact recognizes that their policy does not work. It starts by saying what we've been doing in terms of migration does not work. And then what it follows is more of the same, but more effective, more efficient, and more fast, which to me means that people will not even have enough time to have their cases examined from now on, because there will be fast and immediate deportations happening from the border islands to Turkey, which is a country that has been declared a safe country. So that's the central thing for the context I work, to allow people to continue their journey and to actually demolish the idea of Fortress Europe. So small things.
Thank you. And for the hostile terrain team?
I think for us, the big things are pushing this current administration to not just rethink current policies, but I think really to abolish ICE as an institution that I think it cannot be rehabilitated. But then also, to publicly recognize that the policy that we have in place, prevention through deterrence, literally murders people. The migrant death is not a unintended consequence of a policy. It's a direct consequence of a policy that's for decades been known to put people in harm's way. And so I think it's reckoning with that, and then also just recognizing that the things that are happening in Central America that have been oftentimes a direct result of U.S. foreign interventionist policies, and now increasingly the impacts of global warming, will continue to create this nightmare along the U.S.-Mexico border. And until we start dealing with things in those places, we're going to continue to have this mass of people being put into harm's way at the U.S.-Mexico border. So it's recognizing that we need to help these countries that we have been responsible for messing with and making those places unlivable, and then also recognizing that the policies that we currently have in place at the border, they're not Donald Trump's fault, but they go back much farther, and we need to push for real change, not rehabilitation. I think it's fundamental change in how we police the border.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, the prevention through deterrence policy was part of a democratic government and not a Republican government. This is, I don't know, just an interesting background information. I would like to take questions from the audience now. Please type an asterisk in the chat if you would like to say something. And then we're free, we're happy to take your questions. Please go ahead, Cesar.
Yes, you can see me. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. It's really nice to hear about your experiences. I didn't know about your projects, and all that you tell relates and speaks to my heart very close. I am a PhD candidate working at Radboud University in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And I have been thinking on how to develop performatic kind of enactment project in which we can tell about the invisibilization of the violence in the border zone where this city is close to. Nijmegen is really close to the Dutch-German border. And one day I found myself cycling. I usually cycle to Germany to get the good bread they have over there. And I found myself cycling in a very small path in a natural area close to this city where I live. And I realized I was a bit lost, and I realized looking at the maps that that dirt path was actually the borderline. On both sides, there were farms, and the only beings controlling my border crossing were actually cows looking at me. For me, as a Mexican person who knows the southern and the northern Mexican borders and how violent these are, that was very uncomfortable. You know, that moment, realizing that no one was actually controlling my border crossing, there were no fences, there were no armed guards, no drones, etc., was highly violent itself. So with this necessity of you know, showing why and how this seemingly open and peaceful border was hiding the violence occurring in other borders in the world, it has become a necessity. Then I was thinking on how to translate this to a kind of performance, to a kind of visual project as well. And you have given me so many ideas. My question is precisely about regarding this invisibilization of violence in the internal borders of Europe, in some of them actually, at least, as the one close to where I live here in the Dutch-German border zone. So my question is, and I was thinking to, if you have any ideas on how to visibilize those border crossings in a border space like the one I described, where you know, its peacefulness and openness and the lack of spectacularity is actually what is telling me or what is giving me a hint of how violent this is. And a very good idea. It's also involving students, and I really like this process of accompaniment. But I don't know if you have any comments, any suggestions. Thank you very much, you all, for what you have told us.
Who would like to?
Can I just say something very brief in relation to that? I think it is an important point and relates to the whole idea of visibility and invisibility, which I think is central to this whole discussion and to the whole phenomenon of migration. One of the key findings of my research on Lesbos is that the whole apparatus is based on that notion and the interplay between visibility and invisibility, and also spectacle and surveillance. And I think both facets, both the spectacle and the surveillance, were present in a context like Moria, in the context like, you know, the Lesbos border. You wanted the spectacle of humanitarianism. You wanted, you know, all the visits by dignitaries at Moria, from the Pope to prime ministers, were relating to that notion of the spectacle of humanitarianism and of Moria as a stage. But at the same time, you wanted also to emit an image of high security, hence all the miles and miles of razor wire around that compound of Moria. So there were messages sent to various audiences through that kind of stage of Moria. It is important for us to, I think, evoke that sense of visibility for the facets that are not actually projected through the media. I have in mind an example, a performance that was done in Berlin a few years ago by a group, a collective of artists, and the installation or the happening was called "The Dead Are Coming." And the idea was to organize a parade of coffins in the streets of Berlin to evoke the sense of the missing migrants, the migrants who actually died in the process of crossing the border. A phenomenon that for an inhabitant of Berlin is not very easy to visualize because it's so far from their own reality. And they wanted to show to the inhabitants of the city how, you know, what is the reality of the fortress Europe? What is the reality of employing for Frontex and so much kind of militarized forces on the border when people from the global south are trying to cross into Europe. So attempts to visualize those facets of migration that are not shown in the spectacle of migration, I think are important. I do not have specific suggestions for your border. Cesar, is something that you have to work out yourself. But I think you are right in saying that here is an issue of visibility. The border for you is not visible, but there's a huge, highly militarized border for the European Union. And of course, increasingly, we are seeing also the phenomenon of the externalization of the border. The European Union paying countries like Turkey or countries in North Africa or countries in West Africa to stop people even reaching the border. So that's something else that also needs to be discussed, something that needs to be visualized for the citizens of the European Union.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any suggestions, but I feel you very much, Cesar. Like I'm from Turkey and as a Turkish citizen, so the first time I realized the absence of borders in Europe was when I actually had an exchange semester in Germany on the Swiss border in Constance. And I was also very kind of surprised about this kind of freedom of just like kind of walking through the border, even though there was a kind of checkpoint, like nobody cared to check my passport or anything. So I think it is also important to think about like how these borders reflect on forms of anti-immigrant racism and how these also change over time, because so my doctoral dissertation research is in Sicily, and I flight from Sicily to France actually. And when I entered France, I went through the border, like the customs, which has never happened to me flying within Europe before. So I think that's something new. I don't know if that was there in the first place, but I feel like that is something that's like a new implementation to kind of, again, to stop migrants to coming in further to what is known as the kind of Fortress Europe, I guess. So yeah, I think we have to kind of think about those. I don't have any suggestions, I'm sorry, but yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I also think this question raised an interesting point, because what we did not talk about today is phenomenons like racial profiling or residence obligations that keep people in certain places, even though we do not recognize the borders. If there is no urgent wish to answer this question, I would like to take another question that was written in the chat by Olga. To what extent do you think the exhibitions can work as an alternative instrument of knowledge against the new policies, such as the EU's that seeks to legally or demographically manage rather than no refugees?
I mean, I'll just say that I think that we, as a discipline, and even just as social scientists, we need to rethink what it is we're actually doing at the end of the day, and what the types of knowledge that we produce and the ways in which we disseminate that knowledge. I think that the academy is stale. I think it's in many ways a dying beast that just keeps trying to reproduce itself, so that we can talk to the six people in our little area of specialization. I don't think that that's a sustainable approach, especially given the crisis that we are experiencing as a species. And so I think that we should think about alternative forms of knowledge production, not just as these kind of cute alternatives to the journal article or the book monograph, but I think for me it's do or die. It's we need to find ways to educate the public so that we can improve the conditions of our species, and whether that's through an exhibition or through a documentary film or through new forms of writing. I think we need to take those things very seriously, and the academy very much want us to to reproduce the things that have come before us, and I don't think that's sustainable anymore. And so I would hope that, you know, that exhibition work can be a way to educate the public, and I would hope to you know, enrage them. I think we should all be enraged about the state of affairs, and it's hard. You know, we can write an angry journal article, although even that's difficult to do, right? It goes through a particular filter and comes out the other end, and it's oftentimes, you know, sanitized. And I don't think that we live in a world where we can sanitize this knowledge just because that's what has been done before us. And so I think that, especially with, you know, I sort of see my mission partly is to set an example for young scholars to see that there are alternative ways of being an academic, and there are different ways to take our work and engage with the public that we hope can be a catalyst for change. But it's a struggle. I mean, we are training graduate students to reproduce the academy, and that's unfortunate, because I think that if we keep doing that, I mean, we will go the way of the dinosaur, because people don't read journal articles. People aren't getting the information that I think is important, and we as experts can be sharing. And, you know, part of our job too is it's to point out the way that the world is, so that we can hopefully make change. But I think that these conversations need to happen early on, so that students, young researchers, can have alternative ways of thinking about, you know, what it is they want to do and how they want to put their work out into the world.
Can I just say on short kind of things in relation to the very interesting question that Olga asked us? I agree, of course, with what Jason said. The issue of getting to know, to produce knowledge as opposed to produce management, typology, and classification, because the other thing that the authorities do, let's say in places like Moria or on the border, is to classify people, to actually produce a series of kind of racialized, very often, typologies of people, in order to produce further kind of management of the whole phenomenon. So yes, knowledge in a very direct, intimate, humane way, because even the terminologies we use, like migrants or border crossers, we forget that they are homogenizing labels. There are labels that impose a certain kind of identity upon people who have many, many facets in their own identity. They are not just migrants. They happen to be on the move at this specific moment in time. But I want to know for each and every one of them, what do they do, whether they paint or write or read poetry, or they're engineers or doctors or farmers. All these facets of their identity can be, in fact, evoked to some extent through an exhibition like this that does not necessarily emphasize only the identity of the border crosser. So knowledge, yes, it's important, but also affectivity and memory are also important. And I have the sense that an exhibition can act both at the epistemic level, but also at the level of the affective and affect, and at the level of memory and representation. We are tired of seeing, for example, in the media, certain stereotypical, very, very often stereotypical photos of a migrant or of a migration scene on the border. As you know, there is now a canon in the photojournalism, a canon which will show a straggling person out of a boat on a beach, or a life vest, or something that has become very, very canonical and very stereotypical. Through a range of objects in the exhibition, people can see the different facets of their people's life. They can also establish affective connections across borders. For example, a photo of a teenager from Afghanistan staying in Moria and showing her own wall with cuddly toys, or with dream catchers, or with objects that could be, in fact, in any teenager's room, anywhere in the world, establishes an affective connection. And these are some of the functions of an exhibition like this, beyond the important facet of knowledge.
Thank you very much for this really deep and vital answers. I would like to ask if there are more questions in the audience. I have plenty of questions I would like to ask, but I would love to let you ask questions, people in the audience. Please go ahead. Do not be afraid. We don't bite. Okay, it seems there at the moment no more questions. My question is, these exhibitions, you rightly claimed that the exhibition is a kind of a nexus between the scientific debates and also the public. When I was filling in these toe tags, my idea was, if I would be a border crossing, and I know that you have displayed the hostile terrain display also in Mexico, it gives a very detailed knowledge about which parts of the desert are highly violent, where people died by violence and blunt force injuries, and you have other regions where people died scarcely and because of exposure to the environments. There's also already a very specific form of knowledge of border crossings. I'm not sure, I do not know too much about the transient material exhibition in this kind of concerning this kind of issues, but in what way did your display had a kind of aftermath in your context of research? How did people use the kind of knowledge you provide with your displays? I don't know, in their migrations, in their daily lives, as a kind of level to refer on, like a more representative level of that they see their life experiences, but also their personal loss being displayed in a certain exhibition. Can you tell us something about that?
I mean, Gabe or Nicole, do you guys want to talk a little bit about sort of the reaction to the exhibition, public reaction?
Sure. I think that, I mean, the way people react to seeing the exhibition, the way that they're engaging with it is so vastly different depending on, the person's background, where they're located. But, a lot of people will come and see the exhibition, they'll participate in writing these tags, and they don't realize they don't come into it realizing the connections they'll make until they're, writing someone who was the same, or who is the same age as them, who died on, or whose body was recovered on their birthday. They can remember, these days of celebration while this, simultaneously someone is dying. And so I think for a lot of people, it's like a wake-up call to the realities, and that kind of is a catalyst for people to take action, whether that's, volunteering for an advocacy organization or writing to their representatives. And then for others who have deeply personal connections, I think for, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but based on, what some folks have told us, in a lot of ways it can be cathartic to write, these names and to be able to take part in that memorialization. And for others, it can, I mean, I won't, beat around the bush. For others, it can be traumatizing. And so that is a big thing that we are constantly aware of and talking about, is these different reactions that people have, and how can we best support those people who are responding in so many different ways. And Gabe, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think you put it perfectly. I'm going to leave it at that.
I'll say a couple of, brief things, and then Darcy and Ayşe may want to add. For us, this exhibition was from the very, very beginning in collaboration with the people in Lesbos. So by that, I mean both people on the move, migrants, border crossers, whatever you want to call them, but also organizations that we've been working with for years. And I think that was important. It was not something that was actually decided and designed now. it was developed through a relationship of trust, which, as Jason said, is extremely important over the last 5 years on the island of Lesbos. So people were aware of the logic of the exhibition, they were aware of its components, and they were aware of the kind of things that were going to be exhibited. We know, at least the collaborators and the people I work with, they're actually very active themselves online. They produce their own representation of themselves very often. Most of them have Facebook accounts, and they produce regularly kind of images of their own life there. They often report themselves of their own life from inside the camp. So they were able to see what we were doing. They were able to see the online version of the exhibition themselves. They were able to see their own work exhibited, and that was more the case with people who were for whom we were exhibiting paintings or works of art, but also people who took photos of their own life inside the camp. They could see their photos being exhibited in the museum. I think my impression so far by talking to them is that they liked this exhibition. They thought that it added value to their experience there. It added kind of, it gave them a sense that other people are aware of the conditions, other people are aware of their struggles and their work. And for some of them also, for some of the artists also, it was important to see their work being exhibited in contexts like this. We tried to find ways to have a direct connection also with fundraising links and campaigns. That wasn't very easy to do because of the various regulations inside universities on whether to donate money or not. But links were there provided on the website for people to go to their specific charities and organizations to support the initiatives and be able to help more directly. Darcy, Ayşe, I don't know if you want to say more on this.
I don't have anything particular to add.
Me either. I think that covers it. And we're still waiting also for a sort of complete assessment of feedback from the exhibition, because it opened, I think, a month before the museum had to close. So a lot of people have seen the online exhibition. I think we didn't initially intend to have an online component of the exhibition in the same way. And it was actually kind of fortuitous that it happened that way, because I think a lot more people have been able to see it than would have. And I've received a lot of feedback from people who are like, oh, I didn't even know you could see museum exhibitions online. So I think there's still some boundaries to push there. And I think that, you know, as it stays up, and I hope that it can stay up even past the physical exhibition, we'll get a better idea of what the impact has been in terms of audience and people who've taken it in and what they've learned from it. But yeah, for the time being, I think it's what Yannis has said.
Thank you. There's just another long message in the chat. I know from, okay, there's this question about collaborative thinking and considering the water of the Mediterranean and the desert and the sun, etc. in your exhibitions, as far as I understood.
Yeah, it's actually a very, very interesting question, because it forces us to do a deep comparative kind of analysis of the two contexts in terms of terrain, in terms of environment. And I've been thinking a lot recently about this, because I had to write something about death in the two contexts, something brief. And I've been thinking the desert and the water, but yet you also have a desert in the Mediterranean, it's the Sahara, and for which we have very, very little. And there are people trying to cross the Sahara to reach the coast. and that we don't know how many people actually manage to do that. So there is that dimension, but of course it is right to say that the main border itself is a liquid border. It's either, you know, the sea, or in one case, the case of the Greece Turkey on the northeast, the Evros River. So there are specific phenomenological attributes in the two contexts that make for an interesting comparison. I'm thinking about visibility again, especially in relation to the people who did not make it, like the dead body of the migrant in the desert and the dead body of the migrant in the Sea of the Mediterranean. And I'm thinking that maybe, I mean, I know from Jason's work that very often many dead bodies are not really recovered. They disappear because of the desert, because of a specific condition, because of the birds of prey. In the Mediterranean, the sea very often washes up, produces bodies, allows for that space of appearance, allows for the body to actually disrupt the condition of visibility of migration. And also, very often people travel in large groups in the Mediterranean. They travel in boats and very often send distress signals. They send distress signals, but we know that they're not always being kind of responded to, but they do warn the authorities and the ships that pass by and others of their own, you know, danger, of their own kind of distress situation. So I think it's more difficult to ignore the dead body in the Mediterranean compared perhaps to the case of the Mexico-US border. So that's, you know, these are thoughts that I'm developing now in relation to these two contexts, but I think it's extremely interesting and important along the lines of the question to reflect further on the differences in the two contexts and how they produce different effects, both material but also social.
That's indeed interesting, because we also have people drowning in the desert. So we're running out of time, but would someone of the terrain team would like to comment on this?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, you know, it's impossible to ignore the parallels. And it's not just the Mediterranean too, right? I mean, you can think about what's going on in Australia, and the Australian government's really, I mean, they had this whole campaign about how, you know, don't come here, the ocean is deadly and will destroy you, kind of thing, you know, which is very much in line with the rhetoric that the U.S. Border Patrol uses when referencing the desert, even though we know well that they're purposefully using the desert as this weapon. And, you know, the abandonment of boats, whether it's in the Mediterranean or you know, in the seas surrounding Australia, you know, it's been done on purpose as a way to weaponize nature. And for us, you know, we had our first European show had been slated to be in Lampedusa, as a direct reference to what's going on there. And, you know, we still do hope that show will happen, partly because we've paid the deposit on the rental property, and she's been holding that money for a year now. But, you know, for us, that's a very important location to draw these parallels and to connect with this global crisis that's happening. And I think that more work needs to be done on the reflecting of how, you know, both nature is weaponized globally, but also, you know, how other countries are being weaponized by the global north. You know, we've talked a little bit about what's happening in North Africa and West Africa, but, you know, what's happening in Mexico now, using Mexico as a weapon against Central American migrants, using the Honduran government to deal with this outmigration problem that is a U.S. created and U.S. experienced kind of issue. I think we need to be thinking much more globally and comparatively as we move forward.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that your project is really an important step in such a kind of a global reflection on hostile border terrains. Because we're running out of time, I have just a very brief last question I would like to ask you. What do you take from that session? Is there something you take from your counterparts at Brown, at the University of California? Something you take from the different projects? What I take from your statements and comments is that we should engage, we should develop long-term beneficial engagement with our counterparts in our research, and we should enrage the public with what we're doing, and that exhibitions can be a kind of gap, the bridging between the academic ivory tower and yes, the wider public. Any more final comments from your side?
I think you said it very, very eloquently, and don't have anything to add to that. Yeah, you're right. Don't know whether others.
I feel this global connection very empowering. And I mean, as a student, I knew of Jason de León and his team's work, and it was really kind of influential for me to think about my own research too, as well as, of course, Yannis's. So I think, yeah, these like kind of seeing what is happening, like all these similar yet like completely different experiences happening all over the globe is very, it's very striking and very kind of moving for me. And yeah, it definitely pushes me, at least on personal level, to kind of think more broadly about this, again, like social injustices on a more kind of global scale than more like narrow local scale. Thank you.
Just along the lines of this, I wanted to say that perhaps the next step is to bring the two exhibitions together on the same space. And in fact, this is something that Jason may know we were trying to do at Brown a couple of years ago when we were planning the transit matter. And I think Jason was in conversation with the Watson to have that exhibition at the same time. And we thought that was going to be wonderful to have, on the same campus, the two components, the two exhibitions. Unfortunately, it didn't work out then. And then then I'm on leave this year, so I wasn't able to work on this. But hopefully another day, another time, another occasion, we'll be able to do that, have the two cases side by side for people to actually see the connections more directly.
Yeah, that would be amazing, and we've been in talks with folks at UCLA about a future global migration exhibition. And so we should just keep having this conversation.
Thank you very much. More final comments from your side? No more final comments. All right, then.
We are at the end of the program, but Anila has continued her question in the chat box.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll answer that real quick. So the name Hostile Terrain 94, hostile terrain comes directly from the Prevention Through Deterrence policy. And so they quote that environment as hostile terrain. And then 94 comes from the year that the policy was enacted, 1994.
Yeah, and it's also, just to jump in, we count in Europe, we count since 1994, more than 40,000 documented deaths in the Mediterranean. It just is another perspective on borders, but it's also an incredible number, and we will also display it in a list that will be outside the police prison in Frankfurt. Yeah. Well, then, if there are no more comments, I thank you very, very much for joining the event, for joining our discussion, and for at least kind of set the ground for a kind of global exhibition on migration and bringing different experiences and different fields of migration together. I really like that idea, and I'm looking forward to what you will develop at UCL in that regard, in Brown, and the kind of collaborations that will that we will see in the future, maybe. And I hope it will be a better future for many people.
Thank you very much for making this possible, and thank you for inviting us.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you very much for organizing.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.